All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 93 of the On Air Advocate, where at the On Air Advocate, we look to provide education, support, and empowerment for all of those with different abilities, mental and medical illnesses, and their caregivers. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Tammy Flynn, and I'm the host and producer of the On Air Advocate, and I am super excited that you are here this evening catching this live, or if you are going to catch this on the replay. Now, as you know, if you find any of this content relevant for anyone within your friends, family, network, circle, please hit the share button and share the love with others. Now, if you guys have been following, we have a lot of stuff going on, but one of our major focuses this week, carrying through some of last week with Suit Up, is Epilepsy Awareness Month kicks off today. And so though we've already been kind of tackling some of it, tonight we have back here Jennifer Bertram. She is a special needs mom, but what I can tell you about her is she is the mother of 2 daughters and the mother to a young adult, Megan, who is 22 years old, that has epilepsy as well as autism. And she has done so much work with the National Epilepsy Foundation, with the parent-to-parent organizations. She's worked as a parent liaison through high school when her daughter was in there, and also done some stuff working towards the Lydia's Law Act. And so I'm super excited to have you back, Jennifer, because you always bring so much education and information and handouts and great stuff for people to be able to take along with them and utilize each and every day. So thank you for being back.
Yeah, good evening. Glad to be here.
Yes, and so, you know, I was thinking where to begin, and I think that first spot might be just a little bit of an overview. I know you've been on the show before where you got a little bit more in depth into your journey, but to kind of touch on Megan, where things are at. She's a young adult now, and then we can really start diving into some of those tools in your toolbox, because you have a lot of them.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah. So Megan was born in 1999 and 1996, and she was diagnosed with her first seizure, which was actually an absence seizure, and we'll be talking about the different types of seizures tonight. In 1999, she was 3.5, and she started out with a couple seizures, and the doctor said, well, it's probably really nothing. Don't worry about it. And I said to the pediatrician, well, what do you want me to do when she has her next one? And he kind of, poo-pooed it and said, she's not going to probably have another one. And I called him, a few days later, and she had a tonic seizure. And so the first month, I think she had maybe 3 seizures. The next month, she had 14 seizures, and then they went to hundreds and then to thousands. So Megan has suffered with epilepsy and seizure, intractable seizure epilepsy, which is, most likely you're not gonna have seizure control. She's probably had over 10,000 seizures easily. So, our journey has been for 20 years. It'll be 20 years in February, this coming February. And, there's a lot to talk about with that, but Megan is now an adult, and just by the grace of God, we are still talking that she's with us here. So we're very fortunate to have her, and she's a joy. And there's a lot of strife, in between the years and the months. But we always look to educate people and teach people. And give them a lot of grace and try to make their life easier and show our wisdom that we can give. So I hope I will be able to do that with people that are starting out on their journey. I'm a very open book. We are very out in social media. Before all of that, we were, in the internet a lot. So please reach out to me if there are any questions. There is no dumb question ever. If you ask a question, that means you don't understand it. And that's what I want. I hope that I can do that tonight.
That is amazing. And what what I love too is, like you said, with all of these years and all the things that you've learned, to be able to pass that on to other parents is really invaluable, you know? What I have found over the last probably week and a half, 2 weeks, which we talked about, you know, I do not have a young adult that suffers from epilepsy. And so the more that I talk to parents and others, I feel like this is kind of unique in the sense that there is no resolve. You know, I mean, there's not a lot of control. There's not a lot of resolve. There's not a lot of answers, which I find, you know, seems like it's a very scary spot to be in.
Can be, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of it is trial and error. As Amanda, you know, she had such a great session with you this last week. I really enjoyed listening to her, and everything she said, I'm like, yep.
That's how
Great point. Yep. So that was awesome. Yeah. So I wanted to dive in and talk about some basics, but I did want to do a disclaimer and just say, you know, I'm just a mom.
Right.
I'm not a physician. I'm not a person that can diagnose. This is coming from my experience only. I am an occupational therapist. I did work in brain injury for 15 years before I had kids. So I do have a lot of background with that, right. But by no means can I diagnose. So when I'm saying this is just for my mom,
Your mom wisdom.
Yeah. So, so just starting off, I want to say that if you have someone that you, it's in your family or it's yourself, make sure that you have been diagnosed properly by a epileptologist. That's the best way to get the best care, or at least at an epilepsy center. So someone that specializes in epilepsy is very critical in how they diagnose and do differential diagnosing and things. So I think number one, you just want to make sure that you have the right diagnosis. And the second thing is that every 2 to 5 years, I always go through genetic testing with Megan again, because they're doing so many advances with genetics and genomes, and there's so much going on. You know, back when we were diagnosed, you know, we did things kind of like, you know, one test and then one test and kind of throw them all out. Now they're in like a package of a microarray, it's called, for genetic testing. And so I just encourage you, if you haven't had a definitive diagnosis, it's just epilepsy and unknown origin, which is very common. Don't give up on the genetic part of it. I would impress upon you to do that. So
genetic testing.
Yeah, that's really important.
And do you have to go back every 2 years to do any other blood work or update, or do you just ask them to return that? Because, you know, my son, before he had his last spinal surgery, we did all the genetic testing, and they said that they just, like, the blood stays in the bank and they just return. And I don't know. Do you guys, when you guys redo it every 2 years, do you go back in for the whole, you know what I'm saying, for all the blood work?
Yeah.
That way?
You know, we just didn't. I mean, we went to, well, when we were in Wisconsin, we were working with Fredert, and we went to see a geneticist over at Fredert, and he's just like, you know, you've done a lot of testing. I just don't think any of this would really be that beneficial for you at this point. Okay. And I just take I mean, it's really costly. It's going to continually go down because those packages are going to get better. And, you know, with the genome projects and a lot of the stuff with genetics, we're just getting much more advanced. So I didn't, but, you know, we do blood levels and all that kind of stuff for medications. But for genetics, yeah, we just did. That isn't part of the epilepsy profile that I'm aware of. But honestly, I'm not an expert in that because I haven't done it for now 3 or 4 years. So, you know.
Okay, whether or not they need something new or not, or whether they save it, or if that's for specific different tests or whatever. Okay.
Right. But that is a really key thing. Most epilepsy centers that's just part of their regime, is to do a certain amount of things. You know, usually they have you, you know, go through an EEG, and they do the, you know, diagnosing, they do the MRI, they do, you know, that's kind of the next step after they see that there's epilepsy and there's, you know, there's a pattern and things like that. Okay. But, you know, I'm talking about 20 years ago. So, you know, there's that, you know, it's now, Yeah, there's a lot. I'm sure there's a lot of advancement, but I wanted to start off with talking about the seizure types. So there's so many different seizure types, and that's really critical. It's critical for the physician to be able to tell you the correct seizure that you're having, but it's also critical that you as a parent, or you as the person that caregives for someone, or if you're the person that has the seizures, that someone else can witness what kind of seizures you're having, because you're with yourself or with another person all the time, right? And your doctor can only see what he sees, if he sees it in the EEG. But now with a lot of the apps, and we're going to be talking about that, you can videotape and send those videos to your physician, and they can witness them, in your home, which is much more conducive for your typical seizure pattern. So it's important that you know what those are. And so there's a lot of documentation out there that will help you to be able to recognize what your family member is having. And I would encourage you to do some investigation on care notebooks. And a lot of them will have pages that you'll be able to do a checkoff system. And there's a lot of different things. And I was part of a project that I think is actually on the Epilepsy Foundation website now, part of their care notebook. But you have to be able to pick apart what kind of descriptions are happening when your son or daughter or your family member is having a seizure. So we're going to start out with just talking about different seizure types. And the first seizure type that we're going to talk about is the absence seizure, and it's spelled absence, but it's pronounced absence. And that was the first seizure that Megan actually had. Okay. And what she did was she just stopped and she stared, and then her face got a little flushed in her cheeks, and then it was about 30 to 40 seconds, and then that was it. And she went back. And I looked at my neighbor and I go, that was just a seizure, wasn't it? She goes, yep, it was. And that was the beginning of our journey right there, right on her Little Mermaid bike. I can still remember it. So absence seizures are generalized onset, which means that it goes to it can go to the whole brain. It's not in one specific area. So it usually will start one place, but it spreads very quickly. And that's why they will stop, because it's affecting different areas of the brain. Okay, so that's the absence seizure. And I'm going to refer to my notes just to make sure that I'm saying things correctly and I'm being very fair to everyone. The other thing, that it used to be called a petit mal, or if it's spelled petit mal, but it's French. They blank staring that lasts only a few seconds, sometimes with blinking or chewing motions. Now, if you ever see your family member do something called munching, they're kind of doing this kind of a thing, that's called munching, and that is most likely either they've had a seizure or it's part of the seizure. Okay, so that's an important thing to know. That's why this is so important for schools, to make sure that the Epilepsy Foundation has gone in, or another organization that can go in and do training for your teams, because teachers are very likely if they can pick it up. Yeah. So that's the first type of seizure. And there's also a subset of absence seizures that's called an atypical absence, and that's actually what Megan had. Basically the only difference is that it lasts a little bit longer, like closer to 45 to 60 seconds. So that's the first seizure type. The second one is a tonic clonic, and those are the big ones. Those are the ones that everyone thinks about when, oh my gosh, they're having a seizure. Those are the seizures we're talking about. They used to be called grand mal seizures.
Okay, so that's the new word, because that's the term that I know is the grand mal. Okay.
Yeah. So now they're called tonic clonic. And why are they called tonic clonic? And we're going to break that term down a little bit. Tonic is the stiffening. Okay, so it's the stiffening, and that's what it's going to kind of look like on my iPhone, so it looks kind of weird. And then the clonic is the rhythmical movement. So if you will, it's like this. So it's tonic, and then they might do something like this, and it might be with their legs as well, and their head might have changed. So the tonic clonic is those two motions. And again, that is a generalized onset, which means it goes, diffusely through the brain. These are the ones that are dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
They take a toll on your body. They feel like you've run a marathon. They take a toll on your brain. Our brain can only take so many seizures. And then
before it starts affecting your memory and all of that sort of thing, right?
It affects your brain cells. I mean, it starts killing off your brain cells, and so so those are the ones that we have to be concerned about, and we have to be very diligent about having emergency care plans, and we're going to be talking about that when we talk about first aid. Let's see. Typically, those will last 1 to 3 minutes. If they're longer than 3 minutes, depending on the person, of course, everything is individualized. You're going to be, you're going to be incorporating your emergency care plan after that time. Okay. So then we also have a complex partial, and those are a focal onset. So that's going to be in one part of your brain. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have multiple types, like even in like the same seizure time, if you will. It can start out with a partial complex, which is going to be like in one area of your brain, and you're going to have a impaired awareness. So they can actually hear you, and they may even be able to be able to follow direction, but they just do very different things. They can they stare. They have different, like, a dazed facial expressions. Not always will they remember what's going on. They may perform a lot of repetitive, random movements. Like I had a friend, we were on actually a program together, and he started playing with his shirt and his buttons and just kind of did this. These are types of seizures that sometimes the police officers don't realize that they're having a seizure. They take their clothes off. They do very different things in public, and people think that they're, not having a seizure. They're doing, just being a little inappropriate, and it ends up being a seizure. They may not be able to talk. Some people can talk. It typically lasts about 1 to 2 minutes. And then after all of these, some of them are more severe than the others. They're confused. With the tonic clonic, the one thing I failed to mention is not only are they going to be confused, but they can be very weak, depending on what type of area or body function they were having that repetitive movement. So, for example, if it's a full-blown both legs and arms, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, it's like running a marathon. Like, are you going to get up and be able to walk? A lot of times Megan would walk into a wall, or she would trip, or she would fall because she's so unsteady. She's confused and weak. Her muscles just aren't working right. And so we would have to almost bear hug her around because she would get so agitated too. And so she didn't know what was going on. She, was so, and I'm sure she was very afraid as well. And so we would bear hug her so that we would just kind of follow her around until she could calm down and get back into bed and be in a safe place. So that's the complex partial.
Okay.
Then the next kind is, again, another focal onset, which is a simple partial. And that is going to be where one part of the body is either jerking, or there's like a sensory or perceptual changes. That is not always on, not always obvious. And these are really hard. And this is these two kind of flow into each other. The complex partial and the simple partial really, almost flow into each other. And sometimes it's very hard to pick which is which.
Yeah.
Megan's had just a few complex partials, and she doesn't have a lot of focal onset, so we have seen those, but not very often. So I'm not as familiar with the complex partials, but they are both focal, and that's something important to remember, because most of the time, those are the type that is a little bit easier to control with medications at times, and when they're focal, then you know where they're coming from, and so you know what part of the brain they're in, and you can have a little bit of knowledge that way. With the other ones, with being generalized, they literally can go anywhere in the brain, and then that's very hard to predict.
A quick question. So when someone has epilepsy, can they have, like you're kind of saying with your daughter, can they have multiple different types of seizures all the time? So is that more common or less common? Do you usually have an individual that has the same type all the time, or is it really more normal for people to have sporadic different kinds?
Well, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure I can answer it completely on my own knowledge, but I'll give it a shot. So my perception is that people usually have one or two types. So if they're intractable, like Megan is, that is, the medications and treatments are most likely not going to ever allow her to have seizure freedom. They usually have multiple types, because
they're not controlled.
Yeah, it's just part of their brain, but it really is the individual. It's really individualized. But I can tell you this, they change. They can change. Megan had absent seizures, then they went into tonic clonics, then she had some complex partials, and she also had atonics, and we're going to talk about those next. But so they can change with puberty, they can change when you're sick, they can change if you've had any other health condition, or they may be just the same. They may have the same, type of EEG pattern and nothing changes. But yeah, so yeah, it could flow. Megan has tonics and tonic clonics.
Okay.
Occasionally, she'll have a partial complex, but that's very unusual. Very unusual. So the last one I want to talk about, or actually two more, the atonics or drop attacks. Those are the hardest, honestly, because they almost always get hurt. Megan has had those a couple times in her life. She's had to wear a helmet. If you ever have seen pictures with her pink helmet on, I mean, she had to wear that for a few years, and a bike helmet. We used that for a while because she would just fall. And she's had a lot of injuries and things like that. So those are the drop attacks are so dramatic. Like, so tonics and tonic clonics, you can definitely fall for those too. But these are different. Like, you cannot get, even if you're holding their hand, they would be on the floor before you could react. That's how fast it is. It is just boom, you're done. Yeah, so it looks very different, and they usually last like 5 seconds. Like, as soon as they're on the ground, it's over, unless they would go into something else, which they may. Okay. And then the last one is a myoclonic, which is just massive jerks in all or parts of your body. So it might just look like this, and they just do this for, minutes, seconds, whatever the individual's kind of pattern in. So those are the types of seizures. And, with that, you can have, a combination of these. That gets to be really, really fun when you're calling your doctor and you said, well, this is what I see, and now I see this, and now I see that. And that's something really good to talk to your physician about, is really being able to break down, okay, what kind of seizures does my kid have, or does my my family member have, and write them down and really understand them, but know that, your kid is going to look differently than my kid or the next person. So that's what gets to be really tricky, but find out. But Megan can have just a tonic. She can have a tonic clonic. She could have a complex partial, or she can have kind of all of them in one. So they kind of move from,
Right.
in one actual seizure. So, yeah.
So within that, just kind of going back to when you first started and finding the right doctor for you, regardless if you have the best doctor in the world and they kind of scope this out, it seems as if they don't know, right? I mean, they can do all the testing they want in the world and they're not going to be able to tell you, well, your child is going to have just these types of seizures.
Right.
I mean, so they can just tell you, obviously, brain activity, things that are going on that way, but really they're not able to diagnose that. No one is. That's just kind of up in the air. There's no.
Yeah. So the brain, it's really complex and we don't really know a lot yet. I mean, we're learning so much. I mean, it's such a dynamic organism that, we just don't, science just doesn't have it together, knowing what the brain can do. So, as medicine advances and, our research advances and, hopefully we'll get more money for epilepsy. And that research will impact and change how we do business with epilepsy. But it's very complex. So no, doctors can't predict that. I mean, they can see an EEG and they can look at it, but that doesn't mean tomorrow you're not going to have something else. So yeah, that's what makes it very difficult for all included, for physicians to prescribe and do that right thing, for families to deal with change and all that, and then of course the person that has the epilepsy to be always on edge of not knowing when that next seizure is going to happen.
Now, do most people find out they have epilepsy when they're young in their childhood, or is this something that you could have an epileptic seizure when you're 30?
Yeah.
So at any point in time, it can happen?
Yeah, so epilepsy doesn't discriminate. There's no age, no gender, no ethnicity. The most popular ages are 3.5 when Megan was diagnosed.
Okay.
Middle school, high school, teenage, puberty, and then actually a huge subset is 60 plus.
Really?
Because again, the brain's changing, right? And so.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the other thing to kind of talk about before we get into the first aid, which is super, super important, a lot of, if you can just take home, what kind of seizure type you have, and then some emergency care, a care plan. And if you're someone that caregives or someone, if you see someone on the street, you will know what to do. I mean, that is like so important, because with Epilepsy Awareness Day, our month starting off today, I'm going to be posting on my Instagram and Facebook a new fact every day, because education is power. And the more people that know about that, the better. 1 in 10 people will have a seizure and 1 in 26 will have epilepsy. So that is a pretty big number. And, there's 3.4 million people in the United States that have epilepsy. Not all of them are intractable like Megan is. And that's a smaller subset, but a lot of kids are. And that's, I used to know the statistic. It was over 50% in the 4 counties surrounding Milwaukee. I don't know if it still is 50%. 50% of kids were intractable.
Right. And with this being such an ever-changing thing, one day you can be having this type of seizure, the next day this type, really probably for statistics hard to also gauge, that's kind of like when they were talking about Suit Up and gauging how many lives are lost by it. If it's not recognized and in all of that, I think that some of those numbers, they may be much higher than what they're posting, just because of recognition, or the last time that the research was done or the numbers were done, the individuals were having not as harsh of seizures.
Exactly.
Changed, that changed over a few years. So that can change. But so signs and symptoms, do those kind of go hand in hand with the first aid? I mean, obviously you being able to recognize it, like we just went through the different types of them.
Uh-huh.
And then is the action the same for first aid for no matter which seizure it is?
Well, I mean, generally, yes. I mean, I think with the Epilepsy Foundation, they came out with, now I'm totally blanking on it. It was um, stay calm, lay on your side, and there was one more thing. I gave you the graphic for it.
Yeah.
But I thought that is so smart. So Tonic Clonic and any of the tonic seizures, generalized seizures that are so dramatic, those are the ones that you have to worry about the breathing,
Mm-hmm.
not being able to handle their secretions if they were going to choke,
Right.
or it's, when you're convulsing, when you're doing this kind of thing, everything is stopping, right? And you're clenching, and Megan lots of times bites her lip. She bites her cheek. If she's fallen, she might hit her head, and she's opened up her chin 3 times, her head, I mean, there's injuries that can happen with that. So the first thing is, you have to be calm. You have to get them in a position or a place where it's safe, meaning on the ground. So they're not hitting their head, hitting their arms. They're not in like the middle of the street or anything like that where it can cause more harm. Some people will get a pillow. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. But a lot of times you can't, do that.
You may not have one nearby.
You have to stay with that person. And I think one of the most important things besides just the medical attention is looking at your watch, or at least talking in your head, approximately how long is this lasting, so you have to time, it's good to time yourself, approximately, lay them on their side, stay with them, and then really talking to that person in a calm manner, because I can't imagine what that feels like. I try to think about that for Megan, every time she has a seizure, how scary that must be to not be able to control your body. I'm talking about tonic clonics because that's the ones that she typically has, but really any of the seizures, you lose your ability. So talking to them calmly and saying, hey, and I tell the school staff, if this ever happens, just tell her, hey, we called mom's on her way. You're okay. We're with you. You're not going to fall. When I'm with her, I'm like, I'm here. You're safe. I'm right with you. Mom's got you. So that she knows that she's not going to fall, because you don't know what her body in space feels like. You don't know what that's feeling like, and to just reassure them. And then putting them on the side so they don't, Megan doesn't have a problem with this, but this is a really good practice, because you don't know how they're going to be able to handle their secretions. Because when they're convulsing, of course, that's, sometimes people have a lot of, saliva in that, coming out. And so you want to be safe so that it'll just kind of come out their side of their mouth, and the drool will come out, so that, and I'm trying to say this in the nicest way, but, I want to be able to explain it to you so that if you haven't seen it, that you're prepared, that you're not going to choke on it,
right?
Because you can do something called an aspirated, or it can go down into your lungs, and then that's a bigger problem. So you don't want that. So on the side, and then you're counting, and you're, seeing how long it is. I would be thinking about, okay, I'm going to need my emergency plan coming up on 3 minutes. So when 3 months comes around, I'm like, okay, it's medicine time for this girl right now. And so that kind of goes into some other things we'll talk about in a minute. But through all the other seizure types, you're not going to have to give that as much support, but they're definitely going to be confused. You don't want them to get hurt, so you want to stay with them, and you want to talk calmly to them and make sure that they're safe, and then they come back to baseline, or back to where they were before. So an absent seizure, I have to say, Megan used to lose her urine with those. It's not unlikely that a person that has a tonic clonic doesn't have an accident. And so then you have to clean them up, and, you have to do that in a way that, after they've kind of come to, because otherwise that is very, very difficult to do and very confusing for them. The atonic seizures, those are the ones that you can get really hurt. So you have to assess them for if they got hurt. Did they break something? I've had friends have kids break their legs, their arms. Megan chipped a tooth and we had to get a crown. Megan's broken her arm. So there's the atonics are that part, but, again, staying with them, the myoclonics, kind of the same thing. And the complex partial and the simple partial, because they don't always go into the having the motor deficit, or they're not doing the full convulsion. It's more just making sure that they're back to where they were before with their mental status. Okay. So their awareness is back into the here and now, not the impaired, the confused, doing, different things that isn't typical for a person like themselves. So the first aid is different for each of the seizures, but in general, if the Tonic Clonic is obviously the most dangerous, and also the one that requires the most amount of support.
Right.
And it's the one that you need the care plan for. Really.
Now, if you were obviously having an individual that you were caring for, that wasn't your own child or family member, or if you're out on the street and you see someone, the action of that would still probably be obviously get them safe, but have somebody nearby calling 911, right? Because you don't, and you don't know their care plan and all of that. But
exactly.
Family member, it's at that 3-minute mark, right? That's what I've been gathering, right? That about that 3 minute and over is when that emergency plan comes into play, right?
Yeah, some people say 5 minutes. This is the conversation you'd have with your physician, because every person is different. We were 3 minutes because we knew that at 3 minutes, if she didn't stop at 3 minutes, she wasn't going to stop.
Okay.
So, and then if we waited too long, then we got in big trouble. Then we went into something called status epilepticus, and you then were in big trouble and required a lot more medication, and then required an ER visit and, a paramedic and the whole 9 yards. So we found that out the hard way. So you learn, and it really is individualized. So you have to have those experience. You can't know it. You do the best, the best that you have with the information that you have. So I always say for people around the 3 to 5 minute mark, if they're not coming around, you got to get your care plan. And I say, if you don't have a care plan, you need to have one, even if you have someone that's never had a tonic clonic,
right?
Because when you have a seizure, you really don't know. So I really just encourage people to do that. So that's another conversation, is to get an emergency care plan. And that can look very differently. And that's could even be another, discussion. But yeah, you definitely want to have that discussion with your physician. And there's a lot of options for care plans. And then obviously you want to have one for the school too. So it's important that you have a home care plan, but then you have a seizure care plan with your IEP or 504, or just a care plan, knowing that if it did happen in school, how they're going to handle it, because that's even more scary because mom's not there.
Right. So you want to make sure that all ends are covered.
Yeah. So the care plan is pretty critical. And, that is something that you definitely want to have in hand. And if you have any questions about that, I can certainly help you figure out what to do, but go back to your physician, talk to him about it, and come up with a plan. And a lot of this is trial and error, but Diastat is the go-to, which is a rectal Valium for long seizures. It works. And there's other medications that are coming out that are in different ways of distributing it. But that is the go-to for kids especially. Yeah.
Okay, for that. And I know that one of the one of the links that you gave me, because afterwards, all this stuff, we are going to link up some links for you guys to have printout sheets and whatnot afterwards. I think one of those was a care plan, isn't it? I mean, kind of like an outline, just like your name, just kind of a sketched out one. Obviously, you'd make one a little bit maybe more customized, with your doctor, but it's a general care plan.
Right.
Medical plan of action.
Yeah. And so the Epilepsy Foundation has things like in their care notebook if you want to go on. I mean, I found a lot of this information right on epilepsy.com, and I would really highly recommend you going in there and getting it. I mean, I just got some basics out because I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything I hadn't missed, and I don't want to forget anything. I did want to talk just briefly on just what causes of epilepsy, because I know when people get diagnosed, the first thing they say is, no one can tell me. They tell me it's idiopathic, which basically means unknown. I mean, we really don't know why it happened. So that's the most common. That's very, very common. And we kind of found out through years of, talking and EEGs that Megan had something called cortical dysplasia, which is kind of the same thing as unknown. But roughly it's when, her cells were all getting formed. Some of them didn't line up properly, and she had some that were kind of not symmetrical, and it kind of made it to be kind of a brainstorm. And then that's kind of how the whole epilepsy thing came about. And so you can read about that. I didn't put a lot of value on that, but a lot of people will say, well, why do I have it? I mean, they can't find any causes. Well, there are some causes. One is trauma, birth trauma.
Okay.
Megan had some birth trauma. We were told that wasn't it. We kind of think it was. I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. If you have a head injury, you're in an accident, you get meningitis, all these types of things. A lot of people coming back from the war or that were in combat have head injuries, concussions, things like that can cause seizures. And those are kind of obvious. But for kids, a lot of it is genetic. We just don't know.
Right.
We just don't know enough. Also, kids on the spectrum can get epilepsy, and it's quite a bit higher than a lot of the other types of diagnoses. But 3 out of 10 children, I'm just reading off epilepsy.com, with autism may also have seizures. So I think it's going to be higher than 30%, honestly. But they don't know if that's really
there's really any connection, or if there isn't.
But I think there is. I hear a lot more people on the spectrum that are having it. I mean, it is, it is in that same wheelhouse. People have had brain infections, middle-aged people have had strokes, tumors, or injuries. And then they did talk about people over 65. It's really common with onset seizures. Right. Which I find, and some other things like Alzheimer's disease. So yeah, I mean, there's other things that can cause it. And the other big one in kids is febrile seizures, and that's kind of a totally different thing. But usually people that have febrile seizures do not have epilepsy. I mean, obviously it can turn into more seizures, but usually febrile, it's like they get it when they have a high fever, and then
right. And does that do the same kind of injury to the brain, or not really, because it's kind of more sporadic and they're lighter?
Yeah, I mean, if it's just going to be like a fever and you had a seizure and things, I'm not going to say it doesn't, because I don't really know the answer. But I mean, I just common sense would say, if you've had one seizure and you're sick and then you get better, you're okay. But if that would happen on a more regular basis.
Yeah. And you're still shaking up the brain. You know what I'm saying? I mean, regardless, your body is doing something that it shouldn't be. And so there has to be some little minute, every time anyone has one, little minute things of damage that happen even with those ones with the fever.
Right.
Thinking.
Well, yeah. And, the one thing that they do rule out is, you know, brain tumors. I mean, that's why they do the MRI, because that is one of the, you know, it can be a cause. But the other things they have for seizures are brain malformations, which is kind of what they mean by cortical dysplasia for Megan: lack of oxygen during birth, low levels of blood sugars, errors of metabolism, intracranial hemorrhage or a bleed in your brain, and drug use from mom. So those are all common causes why you may have a seizure. But in general, if your physician says idiopathic, it means they don't know, and we just don't know enough about those. So
Okay. So for the documentation,
yeah.
is that where you were more referring to the care plan? I mean, the care book, that you were talking about, kind of your record book?
Yeah, so I'm a huge documenter because I'm a OT, so that's kind of been my life. So I like to be very organized. So I want to talk about a little bit about organization and just things that can help you. So a care notebook is definitely, I was going to put mine out to show you, but I made mine back in the early 2000s, and it's about this thick. Now I have, you know, file boxes and, you know, plastic bins of all her information. But, you know, when you're starting out, a care notebook is really critical, and you can just print them out and you can make it your own. I always put pictures of Megan on the front cover, and I always brought it to all my appointments because I wanted my physicians to always see Megan as Megan, not as the person with the kid with epilepsy or the kid with this. I wanted her to understand what Megan was like and who she was. There's so much you can do with it, but writing down things, you know, questions, you know, doctors' numbers. I mean, this was before we had iPhones, right? I mean, we had everything written down.
You know, and I don't know, do you still, I do everything written down. Marcus has a four file cabinet full, you know, like the four, and then I have I have a really hard time. I'm always like, well, what if something happened to your phone, like your electronic device stopped working?
Yeah.
And if you were tracking, because I mean, I think that especially for the seizure, I mean, like tracking times a day when they're having, I mean, that's really important.
So I just, you know, so I've done it a lot of different ways, but I just do a calendar. This is like really silly, but super low tech, crazy. I go and get a free calendar on the internet. I print it off and I write in the dates and I put my seizures on there. Now, I also use other apps as well, so that I can email like documentation and these little beautiful graphs and things to neurologists, because they are all about that, and epileptologists. Like, they are all about data, numbers, and you have to know like who you're speaking to, right? And so we'll talk about that. But documentation wise, I just want to impress upon you people that writing things down has saved me in so many ways. I can see what's going on. So when Megan would have a lot of issues, I could go back and say, okay, what's going on here? What did we change? Why is this happening? I would go back and I would start looking through it. I have a monthly calendar where I write down seizures and changes and things like that. But then I also have a daily one. I track a lot of stuff every single day and I write it down. And that I keep those. I've been doing this for over 20 years and I keep them all, and I don't throw any of that away because I can maybe go back and say, oh, okay. And so what that does for you, first of all, it puts you're not going to remember everything. Right. I can assure you that it gets to be so confusing and very overwhelming. So I write everything down and I print it out and I have it. And if I need to refer to it, I have. Otherwise, I put it in my binder, and that's how I do it. Now, because that's really critical. You can have your emergency plans written there. I have it in my house so that if there is an emergency, people know what it is. Even if they don't know exactly what to do, it's written there, and they can ask me, and I can tell them, you know, God forbid I'm not available for some reason. It's written on there exactly what needs to happen. Okay, but it's given me a sense that I can figure things out, because you get in these overwhelmed states when your kid isn't doing well. and grief takes over.
Right.
And life is hard, right?
Right.
And you can look at a paper and you can just like, what am I doing wrong? What's going on? And we have to be detectives.
Right. That's what I always say. It's like you're a private investigator. And then when you're talking to everybody, you're like an attorney. You're an investigator and an attorney because you're like fighting for the things you need.
Yeah.
And you're digging.
Yeah. So that helps me. And you have to find what's going to help you, like what is going to make sense to you. And if you're a younger person and you're all about the social media, then you're going to want to do apps and things like that. But do have a backup plan if it does go down and all your data goes bad. What do you do then? There are backups and all that kind of stuff, but I would really be mindful about that. So let's talk a little bit about apps. I can tell you right now, I'm not using a lot of apps, but I love Seizure Tracker. Okay, I'm just going to put a big plug in for Seizure Tracker. He's a friend of mine. I had the opportunity to meet him, and he's just a wonderful father, and his wife Lisa. They're both involved in tuberous sclerosis, and the reason they actually developed this because his kid was having so many seizures that there was nothing on the market. So this has been going on for a while that they've had that app. So I definitely would check the Seizure Tracker out. You can link your videos and then email that right to your physician. It does graphs. I haven't looked at it in a while because, again, right now I'm not using it. But it is a super great one to have. I would definitely check that one out. The Epilepsy Foundation has a really nice one called Seizure Diary. And that does about the same types of things. They're all about the same. They may have some different things. You'll find, what works for you. And then I was just doing a little bit of investigative work on other ones that people were liking. One was called My Epilepsy Team. And that was a little bit more interesting about connecting people together. So you could put things on like a wall, if you will, something like that. And then you could meet other people and discuss things. And it was more of an interactive type of thing. And a lot of these have, when you take your medications and, when you're getting a little bit older, like, your memory, to remember them and what time and, being independent, those kind of things is super important. And then there was also one called Epilepsy Journal where they did, it was just a different type. So those are a couple of ones that I was just looking at, and you can look into them and check them out. I mean, I think all of them are free or a very small, price point. And they would be all worthwhile, but definitely have something. And I impress upon you to get something that you can email your physician, because that does rock their world. I'll just tell you right now. They love it, especially when you're beginning out and they don't really know you that well and don't know the seizure types. To be able to see a seizure, I mean, I can't even tell you how big that is. Knowing that when we did it, there was none of this. It was only go into the hospital and get your EEG. That was the only way they would ever see a seizure. And when you are actually in the hospital, kids don't like to have seizures. So you have to do things to make them have seizures. It's the weirdest phenomenon ever. But so check that out. That's that.
Now, I know that just to tell people if they want to look back. So these are some great ones. We'll drop these below because there was an attachment for that. So we'll do that. But also, if you go back to any of the other episodes that we've done with our pharmacist, we did one whole one on apps for medications. So if you're looking for other ideas from, medication apps, there's a whole bunch of them drop below. And I don't know what episode that is. I can drop that too. But if you go back, that one has a whole bunch for different ones that she loves for medication apps. But that's what they're a medication tracking.
Yeah.
They're not the dual.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be pretty important for most people is to actually send the videos. And then what's neat about any of the seizure ones, then it's a graph. So you can see what time the seizures are, what types of seizures there are. You can split it up. You can even put in I used to put in when Megan would have her period and how it would escalate. When she gets sick, you can put little markers in there and they can see like the changes. So you can get really specific. So I want to move on to some other like really important things before we run out of time. I think, Amanda talked a lot about a lot of other things on the last one that I had saw about epilepsy, which I loved. But I really want to talk about parent to parent. That is probably one of the best things that I found, not just because I'm a mentor, but I also got mentored. Okay.
Right.
So like when we were going to think about doing brain surgery, I called Robin up and said, I need someone. And so they can connect you nationwide if they don't have someone in your county or your state. It's statewide. It's, they can find someone close. But honestly, does it really matter? Like if they're in your state, if you get the information that you're needing to make that decision, right? Mm-hmm. So you can get it to prepare. You can refer yourself. You can have your physician refer you. A social worker can refer you. You can just call them up and say, hey, I really need help. And this is what I'm looking for. And they'll match you up and they'll try to find that person. I do a lot of mentoring with parent to parent. What I love about parent to parent is that the person that's going to get mentored isn't the person calling. It's the other person. So if I was going to help someone, I'm the one that's calling the person that is asking for the help. And so that takes them out of one more thing can they do, so I love that.
That support, which is so needed. And, with parents, if they can't find someone or you're directed by your doctor, because that's a very helpless feeling when you're going to embark on something and there's not any other parents that that have had it. Sometimes going to like the Epilepsy Foundation, that possibly they can hook you up with a parent as well. If something was really rare and not found, to go back to the foundations for that.
Well, and I'm going to just be honest with you. Every affiliate has different skill sets. Michigan they would like to start a mentor program. This is the thing that I think epilepsy, if they could do one thing, this would just be a game changer. If they could connect a person, a mentor with every single person or family member that has had a seizure with a advocate, an epilepsy person like myself, or if I had someone like myself,
what's happening? Yeah.
Like
awesome. That would be.
Yeah. But that kind of leads me to the next thing is that you need to find your people. Mm-hmm. It's not your family.
Right.
It's not your friends. It's your people, the people that get it. The people that if you called me up and said, Jennifer, I'm having a really hard day.
Right.
I know what that means. Okay. This is very emotional because epilepsy is really tough some days.
Right.
Your loss of everything is really tough. Your dream of what you thought your kid was going to look like can be very tough.
Yes.
You have your people.
Your tribe.
They can walk with you.
Mm-hmm. And I think that you speak to that, to be very specific. Myself as an advocate, as a mom, as a fighter in this whole world this is even what I do talking to people. Where did I go, Jennifer? When I met Amanda, who was on the other day, I reached out. I reached out to you. Then I reached out to Sally, because what I can tell you is, even though we're all in that same body of water, we're on different ships. And so though I can give Amanda some powerful advocacy, questions, organization, all of that, the symptoms of what her child is experiencing on a daily basis, I'm not the person that sees that every day. You need another parent that is in that epilepsy world or is in that diabetes world that really that does it, because the knowledge that they can share with you, from their journey. And no, they're not, but I really think that we become experts in a lot of the conditions our children have.
Right. Well, and I think that I was fortunate to meet 5 women about 20 years ago. And they're all still, we're in different walks of our lives, but 3 of us are about walking the same walk.
Right.
And they're not just my people. They're like my best friends. Like they know more about me. And I was fortunate to find them at an Epilepsy Foundation meeting, a support group. And we've then become friends. Our families go to weddings together. I mean, we're all friends now. It's not just about epilepsy anymore. It's about the whole family and all that. So I implore you to reach out if it's, if you have to do Facebook, Instagram, whatever, find people that can support you. Go places, and find people that really are in your world. But also make sure that you're also taking care of yourself. And that's kind of what I want to end on is where I know you're going to be talking about caregiving, National Caregivers Month and how that's affecting. But this is just huge. I can tell you that in the 20 years that I've been doing this, that I've not taken care of myself many years, almost decades, honestly, because Megan was so intractable, so many things going on. And as you talked about in the very beginning, she has a dual diagnosis, and with the autism and the epilepsy, things got really mixed up real quickly. Like no one really picked up on the epilepsy or the autism until much later. And that was causing a lot of the problems in the very beginning that we couldn't extrapolate on. So caregiver care is huge. And whatever that looks like for you, I'm in a really good place right now. And I can tell you that, Megan isn't any better. She's still having seizures every day, almost. She can't talk. She's in a school. We're in a new place, so we're learning new things, but I'm good. Why? Because I've really had to dive in and do work for myself. Okay. Because I really lost my identity. I lost my identity because my identity was Megan's mom. Megan, Jennifer, the Epilepsy Advocate. Jennifer, the school, the school advocate for Megan. Jennifer, the doctor, talking to doctors advocate, whatever hat I had on at the moment. And I lost who I was. And, I miss my profession. But you have to get back to the place of what's going to create joy in your heart? What are you about? And finding who you are. And I'm slowly coming out of that. I'm always, I'm very joyful. I have a lot of gifts. I'm very blessed. But in this road, you're going to go through a lot of hills and valleys. But you really need to find things that can really give you joy. And some of those, everything's going to look different to everyone. Right. If you're a spiritual person, I'm a woman of God, and I pray. I go to Bible studies. I read my Bible. I listen to music. I like to run. I like to work out. I like to do weights. I love to be social. Those are my things. What yours is going to look like is different. And every day, do something for yourself. Every single day. Whatever that looks like. If it's 5 minutes that you get to go to the bathroom by yourself.
Close the door.
I remember those days, but if you're not healthy, physically healthy and mentally healthy. So don't be afraid to ask for help. If you need mental health help, don't forget to ask for it, because you know what? This is hard, what we're doing. And everyone handles grief differently.
Speaking to just with mental health that you're talking about, statistically, which I was going to throw that out there, 70% of, all caregivers suffer from some level of depression, with 40% of them clinically depressed and needing to be on medication and extra additional help. And so, and I believe that those numbers are real, because though, we fight through it, it's more the recognition of it, oh, I really need to start doing some things. I need to leave the house, and so sometimes as caregivers, you lose recognizing that it's time to, you need your moments, whether that's like you're saying 5 minutes or 10 minutes or, a little bit of time away.
Yeah. And I think, one thing that I think all of us, I'll just speak for myself. I'm not always kind to myself. Like, this is a big job I got going on here. Right. You know, like there's a lot on my shoulders. You know, there's a lot of people around me helping, you know, my husband and my family and my friends and the doctors and my teams, but it feels like it's on you, right? As a mom, you know, so be kind to yourself. You only know what you know. You know, you can't, you know everything. And I worked with this neurologist once, and I'd always say, okay, well, I didn't really do that well. And he'd always like kind of yell at me like, you know what, you're doing great, you know? And I'd always be like, well, yeah, I know, but I'm trying to learn from my mistake, you know, because, you know, I did that, and that's kind of how, you know, I'd like to move on. But he thought I was, you know, kind of getting after myself. And I think we do that kind of to ourselves, you know, big moms, we do that a little bit more, but I just say, give yourself a lot of grace, just like someone else would. And that grief, you know, is really hard. And, you know, you'll go through that grief cycle when you're doing this a long time. You tend to go through it during like transition periods, like birthdays, people getting the driver's license. She's not going to do that. And so, you know, some of you may know Megan, some of you may not. You know, Megan was able to speak, so let's see, she had 60 words in 2004 or 5, and now she has maybe 5 words. So she doesn't speak, but she does use RPM, rapid prompting method. And I know if you're interested in that, they've done some sessions on that.
Yep.
And so Megan can spell out at times. And I did ask her in the very beginning, you know, if she had anything that she wanted to say to anyone about epilepsy. And she said, the goal is to have no seizures. Yeah. So that's what she wanted to say to everyone. But I think that with people that are, you know, that have been really affected, that there's still a lot of joy that you can find. And sometimes you have to look really small for that joy, but there's still always something really good. And I think, you know, doing a grateful journal is really good. Finding, you know, doing affirmations, you know, even getting sticky notes and putting them on in your house, whatever will help you lift your spirits up, because there's going to be days where it's tough, you know? And I think that the coming into now, you know, getting Megan to this age now, she's a young adult. So I've been impressed upon a couple of big things that were told to me. And I was an advocate for parent liaison in Wisconsin. And so I did a lot of training through CISA 1, and they did a lot of great things. But I remember this mom saying to me once, well, what is going to rock Megan's world? Like, what would she want her life to look like? And what is going to fill up her days? Because Megan is not going to be able to work at a full-time job. Okay? Right. She can't do it. Because she has epilepsy, number one, because that is really tough on employers. But what is that going to look like? And so if you can start thinking about that, it's never too early to start thinking about things like that, because it's not easy. It's a long, tedious process. And I had it kind of figured out. It took me about 10 years. I got things kind of in place. And then we moved. So now I'm trying to create some of those same things again. And what I would say to that is, Megan wants to have a place, and all kids do, and all people do. It doesn't matter what your ability or your challenges are. All people want a purpose.
Right.
They want something to do that they can feel meaningful, and they want to have friends. They want to have people outside of their family to be able to do things with. So those are your 2 number 1 goals. And what that looks like is different for every single person. But for Megan, we went to the Y. That was our place. And she started at the respite nights at the YMCA at Pops Farms there in Oconomowoc. Really changed our life, honestly. Changed our life. And Megan is on the video still. If you want to catch her, she's still on there, and they talk about it, and I'm on there. And now I'm trying to recreate that program and also create a day program, because so many of these places out there for adults are very unmeaningful. Yeah. And Caps Farms has done just an amazing job. So you have to find those places that are, something that is going to really, is going to really fit for your family, but fit for the person and what they want. And then what kind of work is that going to look like? Is it a volunteer job? Is it a part-time job? What kinds of things do they like to do? What are they good at? What are their skill sets? And those are all things that hopefully your school is going to help with. But honestly, it's a lot on you.
Right.
And the quicker that you realize that and just jump into it and, bit by bit, get it done and figure it out, your reward is going to be so large because you're going to see your kid flourish and accomplish things that you didn't know that they could do.
Mm-hmm.
Always reach high,
Mm-hmm. Definitely. For mine, our kids are about the same age, and Marcus turns 21 on Monday. So I've been going through the reflective point. It's going to hit me on Monday. I'm going to tell you for that. But trying to find that self-worth and build that in a world where we don't have a lot of choices and a lot of options, and create that, and knocking on people's doors and creating ideas and talking to employers and, hey, could this work? Because they want their own tribe, they want their own community, they want their own friends, they want to feel self-worth, and self-worth doesn't come from laying at home in their bedroom with no one else, or in their living room.
No, and I think that you're really doing yourself a disservice as a parent if you think that your kid wants to live with you for the rest of their life and be around you forever. You just put yourself in perspective of your typical children.
Right.
Like, use them as a model. Okay, so even though Megan's developmentally has a lot of challenges, I always used her sibling as the model. So what was her sister into? What kind of music did she like? How did she do her hair? What were the fashions? What did they say? All these things guided me how to interact with Megan, so that I gave her as much of that typical type of relationship, even though it was not the same. It wasn't. We didn't do it that way. But that's really important. But I think that we would be really remiss to say that we need to talk about siblings. I mean, that is a big thing that I know that this is on your radar. But when you're in the midst of a lot of the stuff that you go through when you have epilepsy and things aren't working and medications aren't working, siblings have a hard hit. They're not always in the front burner, even though we made a very strong effort for her sibling, did a lot of different things. We try to do a mom's trip every year. Now this year, my husband went with her, which was really cool. And, but you have to think about and give them opportunity to talk about things or not talk about it. Right. Yeah.
That's definitely a huge happen. And in myself, having 3 other children, so I have 4 kids, and I told all of them that one day when they get to that point, they honestly need to write a book, all of them together. You know what I'm saying? Just the life of living with a sibling with chronic mental conditions and developmental delay, and all that they go through. Because those siblings, they're always in the shadows. It's a hard job. I always say being a sibling kind of stinks sometimes.
Yeah, it sure can.
Great things, but they learn a lot of compassion and a lot of worldly, life things that they need to know. But it's not fair. But life isn't fair. We could go into that subject too, but it is. The siblings are just. It's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, and then just a small little side note we talked about caregivers, just taking care of yourself. Part of taking care of yourself is also getting away, and making sure that that you and your significant other or your friends are getting out away from your family member that you're caregiving for, or if it's your child, and to have relationships outside of that, because burnout obviously happens and you need, that time away. So finding caregivers, finding sitters that can do that. It's a very tedious process.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very hard process to retain people and find people that can be good, but it's critical. It's critical to marriages. It's critical to relationships, and really critical for yourself, your own
mental health.
Yeah. So if you ever want any information on that, I mean, I'm sure you're going to be touching about that all month, but I've been doing this a long time, and I don't do it that well. I'm not going to lie. It takes a lot of work and energy, and some days I just don't have it. But it is an important thing. And honestly, our kids need it. Our people that have epilepsy or people that have challenges, they need to be away from you. So that is super important. I mean, let's just be real. I mean, what 20-year-old wants to be around their parents all the time? I remember what I wanted.
Right.
I mean, they're no different.
I say that all the time because, Marcus goes to the gym. Amanda is one of his trainers. And I'm like, he doesn't want to be by me. Like, he sees me way too much. We're in the car way too much. We're at the hospital too much. They're just around you too much. They want their freedom as well. Everyone needs their space. They definitely do. So trying to create that in the world where we have such a caregiver crisis and finding help and single parenting and all that isn't easy. But I can tell you that even being a single parent myself and having multiple children, I get to a point about once a year at least or twice a year that, I need to actually go away. Like, I need to go where I'm like, I don't care, get all the family. Maybe he has to go to 3 different houses during the time I'm gone. But just to have, 48 hours or 72 hours or something where you're physically not around in the environment is definitely mental health wise needed.
Have you done that a lot? How many years have you done that?
Oh, no. I just do it one time a year. I'll go on little things, but
one time a year for how long? How many years have you been doing that?
Not that long. It's only been these last couple that I'm hitting that double, that 2 decades. Now I'm going on over 2 decades, and I'm like,
yeah.
This is because what I think is that when we think of caregivers, a lot of times, just when we're just talking caregivers in general, sometimes we think of this. A little older, more mature adult that's caring for their elderly parent. That's what we think for this stint of time. And where'd you go?
Sorry. You know what? I just got, my phone just went on low power.
Okay. So, we have to wrap it up. But I think that when we're talking about our kiddos that are born with different conditions, this is the long run. This is like a marathon, and this is decades. And so this isn't caring for your loved one for 7 years or 5 years or 4 years. This is decades. And so I think you're so right. But you get to that point. And no, I didn't do it in the beginning. Literally after his last surgery, 3 doctors came in and they were like, Tammy, you got to go. You got to go for at least 5 hours. You got to go. And even though he was in pain, I didn't want to leave, So we still, even though we know it takes something, but yes, definitely this last couple of years, I'm like, it's time. It's time to go somewhere. I don't care where I go, but at least for a day or 2, just to be away. And he enjoys that too. He's like, I think you need to go. And I need
Yeah. I know for sure. Yeah. Were there any good questions that we want to tackle, or are we done?
I think that if we go underneath the live, if you can just type in any of those, is that okay for the questions? Or do you want me to grab?
Oh, sure. No, I can answer questions. You mean for me now?
No, after we
Yeah.
Okay. So on that note, before her phone dies,
Sounds good.
We are going to wrap up. So I thank you everyone for hanging with us for this whole evening. Thank you, Jennifer, for all of your education and all of your information. I absolutely love it. Very, very thankful and grateful to have you in this network and be able to provide to our listeners and to our audience. If you guys want any more information about the On Air Advocate, you can head on over to onairadvocate.com. Also, don't forget that today we just kicked off our Caregiver Celebration 2018, where you can share your story if you are a caregiver, or maybe you do work for caregivers, support, whatever that may be, for us to use our voices, show our faces, all that other good stuff. So on that note, everybody have a fabulous evening. Have a great night. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Epilepsy Awareness Day.